What are the chances of surviving not one but two atomic bombings? What would you do if you found yourself at the epicenter of humanity's deadliest weapon of war, twice? This is the unimaginable story of Tsutomu Yamaguchi, a man whose life defies reason. A quiet engineer, a husband, and a father, Yamaguchi lived a life much like anyone else in 1940s Japan, but his name would become synonymous with survival through the unthinkable. Hiroshima and Nagasaki, two cities forever marked by history's darkest moments. Yamaguchi lived both catastrophes firsthand and walked away not just alive, but carrying a story that would echo through the ages. Would you call him the unluckiest man who ever lived, or the ultimate survivor? In the summer of 1945, World War II raged on, but for Tsutomu Yamaguchi, the war came in the form of business schedules. A draftsman for Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, he was sent to Hiroshima on a temporary assignment. On the morning of August 6th, after weeks in the city, Yamaguchi prepared for his final day of work before returning home to Nagasaki. The air was still, the skies bright and blue, offering no hints of the horrors to come. As Yamaguchi walked through Hiroshima's streets to the shipyard, a blinding white flash suddenly painted the world around him. It was the absolute brilliance of death itself, the first atomic bomb ever used in warfare. The force of the explosion hurled Yamaguchi into a trench, the fireball scorching his skin. Through the ringing in his ears and the dust-filled air, he staggered onto his feet. His arms and face burned, his eardrums ruptured. As he looked around, the city he had walked through minutes earlier was reduced to rubble and ash. Fires raged. Screams rose from an agonizing silence. Hiroshima had been wiped off the map. Somehow, Tsutomu Yamaguchi survived. Despite the searing pain and horrific injuries, he managed to find two colleagues with whom he sought shelter overnight. Together, struggling through a nightmare of unimaginable proportions, they decided to flee the city the following day. Yamaguchi's thoughts turned to his family in Nagasaki. Did his wife and young child even know what occurred in Hiroshima? Would they never see him again? Through a broken city and chaotic train stations filled with frightened refugees, he made the arduous journey home. The brutal twists of war had left no signs warning of what lay ahead in Nagasaki. After arriving home in Nagasaki on August 8th, Yamaguchi limped into work at a Mitsubishi office the following day, despite his injuries. He was determined to explain what he had seen in Hiroshima. As his boss dismissed the story of a single bomb leveling an entire city, history prepared to repeat itself. At precisely 11:02 a.m. on August 9th, the second atomic bomb exploded over Nagasaki. This time, Yamaguchi was less than 2 miles away from the epicenter. For the second time in 3 days, the world erupted in fire, wind, and terror around him. Once again, Yamaguchi survived. The blast shattered windows, tossing him across the room like a rag doll. Stumbling out into the heavy black rain of fallout, he now faced the devastation of his own city, his home. The toll of the second bombing was personal. Scores of friends and colleagues were killed, many of them burned or crushed under collapsing buildings. But miraculously, Yamaguchi's wife and child survived despite being in the city during the attack. Surviving the atomic bombings was only the beginning of Yamaguchi's struggle. Both physically and emotionally, he bore the scars of 2 nuclear infernos. His body, burned, battered, poisoned by radiation, faced a path toward recovery that would take years, and even then, many wounds would never wholly heal. Emotionally, Yamaguchi wrestled with nightmares of those 2 horrific days. As a hibakusha, or atomic bomb survivor, he dealt with the social stigma in post-war Japan, where survivors often felt ostracized due to misplaced fears of radiation sickness. But through it all, Yamaguchi refused to be consumed by despair. Instead, he began rebuilding his life in Nagasaki with his family, drawing on inner strength to find purpose amid unimaginable tragedy. Years later, as the world entered an era of Cold War and nuclear arms races, Yamaguchi realized his survival carried a responsibility. Though soft-spoken and humble by nature, he emerged as a voice against nuclear weapons. He began sharing his story publicly, not for sympathy but as a warning. If humanity was capable of building such destruction, he believed, it was also capable of preventing it from ever happening again. Yamaguchi's dual survival symbolized more than luck. It became a rallying cry for peace, a reminder of the sanctity of life when life itself seemed fleeting. In his later years, he even journeyed to the United Nations to speak against the proliferation of atomic weapons, cementing his role as a reluctant but vital messenger of hope. The story of Tsutomu Yamaguchi forces us to wrestle with difficult questions. Was he cursed to bear witness to these two life-altering events, or blessed with a miraculous resilience that defied reason? For Yamaguchi, the answer seemed clear. His survival came with a responsibility he could not ignore. Though his body carried the burden of radiation sickness for the rest of his life, his spirit carried the desire to prevent further tragedy. Surviving 2 atomic bombings is not just a statistic. It is a testament to the fragility of humanity, the cruelty of war, and the remarkable endurance of the human spirit. Tsutomu Yamaguchi's story is not just an account of history, but a challenge for the future, to never again unleash such destruction upon our world. As the years went by, Yamaguchi lived a modest life. He passed away in 2010 at the age of 93, a lifespan almost unimaginable for someone who endured what he had survived. His story remains a haunting reminder of both the fragility and resilience within us all. It is a tale of survival against impossible odds and of carrying the scars of war not just on your skin but in your soul. To this day, Yamaguchi's life stands as both a warning and a beacon, calling us to remember, resist, and preserve the fragile beauty of peace. The world heard Yamaguchi's story not because he sought fame, but because he sought to ensure no one else would ever endure what he had. It is a legacy not only of survival, but of courage in the face of catastrophe, a legacy the world cannot afford to forget. So was Tsutomu Yamaguchi the unluckiest man in history, or its most extraordinary survivor? That answer lies not just in his story, but in whether we heed its lessons. The choice is ours.